Well, Cynthia, thank you for inviting me. And I love this group. I love being here when I can. And I'm really happy to join you today. I want to just start by acknowledging the elephant in the room that these are such uncertain times, really dismaying times, very uh, destabilizing, just not knowing, what is happening, what's going to happen. And I really do feel it's at times like these that it's helpful to return to our own intention, to live an awakened life and to live by our own deeply held beliefs, no matter what's going on around us, uh, to live by our principles in Buddhism and recovery and to support others. And we never knew this, we never do this perfectly. And if you're like me, you may be harboring this idea that if I just keep trying hard enough, I'm on some kind of trajectory towards perfection, correcting all the little flaws and mistakes I've made. But these are all the things that make us human. I don't think people love us because we're perfect. I think people love us when we share our vulnerability with them, when we share from the heart, when we make amends if we harm someone. And I think sometimes we're surprised that by making amends draws us closer to people instead of pushing us farther away. I want to read just a little bit from my book, The Zen Way of Recovery. I know some of you are familiar with this book, that it's from Shambhala. And it's a book it's really based on the Dharma talks I've given that many of us have given. Many of us talk about this intersection between Buddhist practice and recovery. And this is from a chapter called Kintsugi, The Places We Are Broken. The Zen tea master Sen no Rukyu. This is a sobriety test. The Zen tea master Sen no Rikyu was traveling through southern Japan and was invited to dinner by a man who wanted to impress him with an elaborate antique jar. Rikyu, though, didn't seem to notice the jar, but spoke poetically about a branch swaying in the breeze outside. He said his goodbyes and went on his way. Frustrated, the host held up the jar and hurled it to the floor, where it broke into many jagged shards. The host turned to go to bed as his startled guests looked at one another. Gathering up the fragments, they joined them together using lacquer infused with gold, a technique that became known as kintsugi. When Rikyu returned on another visit and saw the repaired jar with the veins of gold highlighting the broken places, he exclaimed, "Now it is magnificent." One of my earliest impressions of Zen Buddhism was an article I saw in a magazine about the practice of kintsugi. The syllable kin means golden and suji means joinery, so to join with gold. When repairing a broken teacup, rather than disguising or hiding the broken places, they can be highlighted, contributing to a new kind of beauty. The practice of kintsugi belongs to the Japanese ideal of wabi-sabi, the appreciation of objects that are simple and unpretentious, with a rustic, aged quality. Wabi-sabi recognizes the beauty of things that are incomplete, imperfect, well-worn, and venerable. The great Sufi poet Rumi said, "The wound is where the light enters you." All of us are slightly cracked. All of us has places in us that are broken, incomplete, wounded, imperfect. Sometimes we forget that the places in us that are broken are the very places where we connect with other people. I want to talk today about this imperfection that we all have, and I really enjoyed listening to Cynthia's talk from last week about Sheila, the perfection of moral behavior, and I think this talk is a kind of nice follow-up to what Cynthia was saying about these precepts that we take when we become Buddhist and try to live by, however imperfectly. Um, we've all had the experience, especially those of us in recovery, of making mistakes, of doing things we feel guilty about or ashamed of, and it can be a source of embarrassment and really a kind of shame that still make us get warm or red in the face when we think about things we've done in the past. If we've harmed another person, uh, making mistakes in our relationships, we can feel terribly off balance until we make amends. And I'm so grateful to the 12 steps for teaching me to do that. I don't really think that's something I came across in Buddhism, that I could clear up the wreckage of the present, by making amends. I've been thinking about this very human idea of making mistakes and how we can carry around guilt, shame, and embarrassment when we have this. Thank goodness we have a conscience. Thank goodness we feel badly when we do something wrong. I read a book called The Sociopath Next Door, and the book said the only people who don't have strong feelings are either dead or sociopaths. So it was saying, be grateful for your strong feelings. It means you're human, and it means you have the ability to correct some of the mistakes that we've made. In our Orioki ceremony, well, my teacher tells this story, Linda Cutt, so I think it's okay if I repeat it. She was doing Orioki in the Zendo one day during Sesshin, and she had this thought, I am so good at Orioki. I am really an expert at this. I should have a YouTube video of me doing Orioki. And of course, right at that point, she knocked her chopsticks onto the floor. So they tumbled from her where they were against her bowl onto the floor. Well, what happens when in the Zendo, maybe you know this from having sat one day sitting or sesshin, it becomes a part of the ceremony. And so the head server, everybody stopped eating and just sat there while the head server came up to Linda's seat, picked up the chopsticks, took them back to the altar, and then held them over the incense bowl to cleanse them. I don't know if they washed them. It would be a nice idea to wash them once they fell on the floor. Anyway, they take them back and the person bows, and it would be so easy and very human to feel really shamed and singled out when you make a mistake, when it's handled that way. But it occurred to me, this is saying a mistake is part of the ceremony, and it's something we can acknowledge and weave into the ceremony. In the Shuso ceremony, when someone is head student during a practice period for 3 months, and then they do a Shuso ceremony where they answer questions from the Sangha. At the end of that ceremony, this is written into the script. Everybody says this. My mistakes fill heaven and earth, leaving me nowhere to hide. Everybody that Shuso says that. And I think that it's wonderful that we weave our mistakes, we acknowledge our mistakes, and we make them part of our ceremonies, as if to say, this is not separate from our practice. This is not a bump in the road. This is part of our spiritual practice. I think often the mistakes we make, if we are awake, can lead us in a more positive direction. Our missteps, our poor decisions, if we're awake, we can correct our trajectory. And often, if we've started out on a certain path and then taken an abrupt change in direction, we may feel that we failed or that we didn't follow through with our original goal. But I'd like you to be thinking about this for our discussion. Sometimes looking back, our failures actually led to our truer path. Some of you have heard this story before, but when I taught kids, there was this little boy in my class who was so dramatic and so emotional, and I admired him so much. He was the youngest child in our school to come out as gay, which took tremendous courage, I took him aside one day in class and I said, you are so emotional and so dramatic. And I was like that too when I was your age, and I loved theater. I got into community theater. I was in many plays as a child. I was in plays in high school when I felt kind of ill at ease. I didn't feel like I fit in, but I could be in plays. I always wanted to be an actress, and I majored in drama in college. And Gordon looks at me and he says, "So, Laura, what made you abandon your dreams?" And I was a little taken aback. I said, "Well, there's plenty of drama in third grade." And I didn't tell Gordon this, but I think I had so much more fun and gave something back to the world by teaching kids for so many years, rather than I came to understand that in theater I was just so hungry for applause and attention, and it made me feel kind of cheap. I did love theater, but there's a lot of theater in teaching as well. So even in our failed relationships, if we're awake, we can use that experience to find the kind of allies that we need to have with us. It feels so badly when you have a breakup or a friendship ends, but it might guide you to true friendship. Every single experience, every person we've met contributes to who we are today, even those, seemingly negative experiences or the things that were painful. It's so human for us to want to heap up good experiences and avoid or turn away from bad experiences, to move toward gain and away from loss. But we actually have no idea how things are going to turn out. And there's that famous Chinese story about the man whose son brought home a beautiful stallion, and then the stallion ran away, but came back, and the neighbors came and said, "What a shame! What a shame! You lost your beautiful stallion." And the old man, the son's father, said, "We shall see." Well, then the stallion brought back a beautiful mare, and everybody said, "How lucky you are! This mare came back." And the neighbor said, this is so fortunate." And the old man said, "We shall see." Well, this goes on, right? And in the end, the son is injured by a horse, one of these horses, and is limping and is not conscripted into the army because of that. And the neighbors come back and praise their good luck. And once again, the old man says, "We shall see." We don't know how things are going to turn out. Things that we think are bad can turn toward the good, and vice versa as well. Um, One aspect of Zen practice that I was exposed to early on was that we don't sit with a gaining idea. We don't sit to become a better person or to get some kind of cosmic credit, for being a Zen student. I really do think I had this kind of superstition when I got sober that, well, now that I'm sober, I have this big gold star and nothing bad's going to happen to me. And that wasn't true. I had to deal with some very difficult things, but I was able to do it sober, and that made all the difference in the world. We sit just to be exactly who we are. And in sitting, in the quiet of sitting, and in the way we get to know ourselves through sitting, the things that are obscuring our true self can get washed away in that silence and stillness. The Buddhist teacher Tara Brach, in her fantastic book Radical Acceptance, she talks about how most of us grow up in a kind of fog of shame. She calls this the trance of unworthiness. And, ACA was mentioned earlier. For those of us who grew up in alcoholic homes, if we grew up with violence or mental illness or racism or homophobia or misogyny in our homes, we can absorb through our pores of this message that we too are not worthy. And in many cases, because we're growing up with imperfect parents, they may give us that message that we're unworthy. We're not measuring up to some invisible standard. And it's interesting to me that those of us who grew up in a religion that talked about sin, I know the author Frank McCourt, he committed so many sins by the time he was 7 that he was sure he was going to go to hell anyway. So why not keep committing them? you know? But it's interesting that the word sin is a translation of a Hebrew word that just means to miss the mark. When we lie, when we cheat, when we steal, we've missed the mark. And we can continue to do those things and not feel great about ourselves, or we can notice, oh, I missed the mark. And we're not sinful, we're not bad people, we've made a mistake. I appreciate that there isn't a conception in Buddhism of sin. And the Buddha taught that he taught about suffering and an end to suffering. And he said, if we really knew the consequences of our actions when we break these simple precepts that are handed to us, if we really understood the kind of suffering we cause to ourselves and others out of that ignorance, we just wouldn't do those things. And this is so clear to us in recovery because when we face the things that we've done, and when we notice, for example, our tendency to lie, we can grasp it and change it through, it's a very deeply ingrained habit. I lied when I was growing up because it gave me some privacy in the home I grew up with. It gave me some agency. It gave me a sense of power. And I really had to unlearn that to feel clear in my relationships. So I really appreciate that this is not called a sin, or we're not called bad, sinful people. We've missed the mark. I like that Hebrew interpretation of that. And of course, there's tremendous freedom in overcoming this trance of unworthiness, which is so available to us in Buddhism and in the 12 steps by deeply accepting ourselves just as we are, mistakes and all. And I think it's very healthy to be able to laugh at ourselves as well. I came to Zen practice in 1975. I'd been beat up by alcohol. I thought I was lost, deluded, and upside down, and that I'd failed in my life because I'd succumbed to substance abuse. And because of that, I did actions that I never would have done had I not been under the influence. And some of you have heard me quote Dogen. This saying of his became a pillar of my own practice because when I read this it was on the mirror in a friend's bathroom, or I'm sorry, on her refrigerator. When I read this, I thought, oh, everything I've done up to this point is part of my path. These were unskillful actions that I took under the influence of drugs and alcohol. But it was all part of me trying to find my way. And I could forgive myself because of this quote by Dogen, who said, to have faith means to believe that one is already inherently in the way and not lost, deluded, or upside down, and no increase and no decrease and no mistake. No mistake. So that was incredibly encouraging to me, not because it made me feel, oh, the mistakes I made aren't important. It just made me feel like they were part of getting me to where I was now, which was on the brink of Buddhist practice, you know. I stopped drinking abruptly early, as soon as I came to Zen Center, really, and then didn't drink for 5 years. And during that time, I was at Tassajara. And when I came back to the city from Tassajara, my marriage ended soon after that, but I had a beautiful daughter to raise. And alcohol started creeping back into my life, and I drank secretly for another 5 years. Well, I thought it was a secret. I'm sure there are other people who thought, who does she think she's kidding? Uh, but there's a phrase in recovery literature that we had to concede to our inmost selves that we were alcoholic and couldn't drink like other people. And well, I did drink like other people, but those other people were alcoholics. I had to find other people, not to, just to learn how to not drink. Um, I I had a lot of relapses with my own path to recovery before I came into the rooms, but when I walked in the rooms of 12 steps, I found other people that wanted what I wanted and could laugh and help each other. And that was the difference between trying to stop drinking on my own and drinking within a community. Um, alcoholism is in my family all the way back to Ireland and Scotland, and I have the opportunity, along with my brother who's in recovery, to break that chain of suffering in my family. It's a tremendous honor and responsibility to say that's enough. That's enough. In recovery, we say keep coming back. We might make mistakes, we might slip, we might drink again, but just come back to the fellowship where we can give you encouragement and love you till you can love yourself, and to support one another to live without drugs and alcohol one day at a time. And I think we can say the same thing about making mistakes. If we want to be friends with somebody for a long time, we have to learn to forgive. We have to learn to be tolerant of one another's shortcomings and mistakes. Practice is about coming back. Meditation is about coming back to our breath over and over again. And when we make a mistake, we can note it and we can just come back to our practice, to our intention to live an awakened life. If we harm someone with our speech or with our actions and we become aware of it, sometimes they're the one that might make us aware of it. A heartfelt apology and a sincere intention to change our behavior is so healing to ourselves and others. Gandhi said that happiness is when our thoughts, our words, and our deeds are in harmony with one another. If the things we think, we try to cultivate wholesome thoughts that lead to wholesome speech, and that gives rise to wholesome actions and habits that we can inhabit, for the rest of our lives. We don't have to beat ourselves up or feel like we're a terrible person because we made a mistake. And part of our practice, it can be to move towards deeply accepting ourselves just as we are. And a mysterious outcome of this might be that we learn to love and forgive others as well. I notice when I'm being really hard on myself, I'm not very kind or giving to other people. And we all know this wonderful quote by Suzuki Roshi, the founder of San Francisco Zen Center, who said, you are perfect just as you are, but that doesn't mean you couldn't use a little improvement." And I love that because it sounds dualistic, but both of those things are true at the same time. We're perfect just as we are. And part of that perfection is that we could stand a little improvement. I want to close with a beautiful poem that my teacher Linda Cutts enlightened me with. This is by Antonio Machado, and it's called "Last Night as I Was Sleeping." Last night as I was sleeping, I dreamt, marvelous error, that I had a beehive here inside my heart, and the golden bees were making white combs and sweet honey from my old failures. So I'd like to thank you so much for your kind attention. And I think we're going to sit now. I would love to hear if you had a time in your life where, you had to you had to take a different path, and you might have felt like you were abandoning something that was really important to you, but it led to something that enriched your life. And if you're in recovery, of course, that comes along with hitting bottom and feeling so dejected and so feeling that pitiful, incomprehensible demoralization, and then not knowing that there was a whole world of light and true friendship and well-being on the other side of that darkness. So thank you so much for your attention.